Today's White House meetings have produced three immediate takeaways. First, Washington is floating a US backed security offer for Ukraine that would sit alongside any formal NATO application for membership. Second, Donald Trump said that Vladimir Putin, would accept security guarantees in principle, but he again flagged the idea of possible territory exchanges. Third, a trilateral session with Zelensky and Putin is now being prepared, with Europeans urging that any summit be preceded by a ceasefire. Trump has signalled support for very good protection for Ukraine, described as NATO-like but not NATO, and he pointedly refused to say a ceasefire is necessary before any final state settlement. He's also repeated that Ukraine should not expect NATO entry or a reversal of the 2014 annexation of Crimea. Zelensky called the talks constructive and is treating the security offer as a forward motion. He's trailed a pragmatic baseline for negotiations that start from the current front line, while warning against any springboard concessions that let Russia prepare a future assault. Starmer, Macron and Merz have pushed for robust guarantees and pressed the US to anchor them, but stressed a ceasefire should frame the next step. Starmer called such guarantees historic for European security. Macron even floated widening any summit format to include a European seat. This is not Article 5, but the bones are visible. Think long-term financing for a strong Ukrainian army, ring-fenced air defense and ISR, munitions pipelines and training, plus a US backstop that augments a European-led coalition of the willing. The language points to a rapid assistance, intelligence sharing, air policing, and logistics if Russia violates an accord, with Europe carrying the heaviest load and the US underwriting key bits. The politics will hinge on how explicit Washington is willing to be about triggers, timelines, and any role for US personnel. The three live arguments are the issue of a ceasefire first or a deal first. Berlin and Paris want a ceasefire as an entry ticket to any summit. Trump now says a ceasefire is not strictly required, citing other conflicts. He says he ended without one. That divergence matters because active fighting shifts leverage every week. Trump has spoken of possible exchanges of territory, with negotiations hinting that any talks would factor in the current line of contact. Kyiv has signalled talks can begin where the front line currently stands, but there is wariness of any trade that rewards aggression or leaves cities exposed. The vocabulary is doing heavy work here. A freeze that hard codes Russia's gains is not the same as a monitored withdrawal or a demilitarized belt with teeth. Trump has again said that Ukraine shouldn't expect NATO membership and shouldn't expect Crimea back. Those may be opening positions, but they clash with Kyiv's constitutional and political red lines and with Europe's stated aim that peace must not legitimize conquest. Expect intense drafting gymnastics to square public principles with private pragmatics. Now, why is Zelensky calling this so far progress? Two reasons. First, a US-blessed guarantee would answer the core failure of 1994, when the Budapest Memorandum's assurances proved to be toothless. And proved to be toothless, of course, in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. Second, the tone has shifted. And after a famously rancorous Oval Office meeting in February, today's exchanges were courteous, and the photo op with Europeans created a tableau of unity that Kyiv can leverage at home and in the trenches. None of that settles substance, but it changes momentum. There are risks. There's the ambiguity problem. A fuzzy guarantee will deter no one. It triggers, if the triggers are vague, which they are at the moment, Moscow will probe them. If response timelines are soft, the guarantee is a press release, not a shield. There's a moral hazard lurking underneath. Negotiating while missiles are still falling lets Russia bank incremental gains, then haggle for more. That is why Paris and Berlin want a ceasefire framework. And the domestic risk, any package must be sold in Washington, Kyiv, and across Europe. And if it looks like land for peace, it will face backlash in Ukraine from Ukrainians who have given their lives or risked their lives for what? So that Russia can get richer. If it looks like an open-ended US commitment, it will face backlash, of course, on Capitol Hill as well. So to watch in the next 72 hours we have to see if there's a written US, EU, Ukraine security outline with named capabilities, activation triggers, and a funding plan. We need to look for the language on air defense quotas, ISR tasking, and time-bound resupply. And the choreography of this next summit, Trump says he will call Putin again and wants a trilateral meeting. Macron is pushing to add a European chair to that meeting, and the format will signal who writes the rules of any enforcement mission. If the current line between becomes the de facto map for talks, Kyiv will counter with security buffers, verification, and phased pullbacks. If exchange language persists, expect Kyiv to demand offsetting guarantees and accelerated rearmament. Berlin and Paris will keep pressing for a halt before leaders meet again. If that fails, they will try to bake ceasefire-like constraints into the opening of talks. We're not at peace, but we are finally debating enforceable architecture rather than abstractions. And if the US-European guarantee emerges as a specific funded triggerable regime that keeps Ukraine armed and Russia deterred, today will read as an inflection point. If not, it's just theatre before another grim winter.